welcome to the Book Bunch. Today we are going to be doing a little breakdown of the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is because obviously the Rings of Power has been announced, but also because I feel like this book just really needs some explaining because it is a bit of a hard one to get through. Thank you so much for joining this video today. My name is Sam. If you're new to the channel, I'd like to say a very special welcome. And if you are a returning viewer, thank you so much. I really appreciate the support and I hope that you guys enjoy this. So I have my notebook here because I've written some of this down just because it does get a little bit confusing, kind of the structure of this book. So basically with this book, it is a more of a historical, I know it's like fiction, but like it's historical breakdown of what's happened in Middle Earth before we get to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. So this book was not actually meant to be a book. It was basically all of the resource material that J.R.R. Tolkien invented to help him write The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings so that it had consistent lore. So it's all the, like, this is who was married to who, this is where this race came about, this is why this place is named this certain thing, these are the key players throughout history, and basically this is how we got to The Hobbit and the Rings and all of that kind of thing. So it is very difficult to read because it is a compilation of this stuff. Christopher Tolkien did probably as good of a job as he could have given the circumstances, because he actually put this together after his father passed away. And yeah, it's basically a confusing and tedious historical read essentially, but the history you're reading about isn't real. So I am going to basically spend this video explaining to you some different key players, the structure of kind of the beginning, and then some key things that happen towards the end of the book that will be towards and about the Rings of Power. So the first thing is obviously the kind of, I'm going to call it the family tree, but it's technically not a family because they're not really related, but it's more just like, this is when this was created, this is when this person was created, etc. So at the top we have Uru, who is also known as Ilúvatar. He is essentially the god figure in this world. So J.R.R. Tolkien's writing is very heavily influenced by the Christian faith, so there is definitely some key elements that are very similar to the biblical story. It is not the same, it's more just an inspiration than anything. Then underneath Iru is the Ainur. I'm going to pronounce stuff horrifically wrong because I don't speak Elvish, surprisingly. They are called the Holy Ones. They are also called the Valar. Throughout the book, they're mostly referred to as the Valar. They are basically God's angels, from what I could gather from the story. So there is 14 in total, plus one that is the Satan figure, so there's 15 in total. The people are as follows. So there's Manwë, who is married to Vardar. They're kind of like the head angel in this circumstance, and his wife. Then there is Ulmo, who is kind of the second runner-up, I guess you would say, who is also very powerful. He is on his own. Then there is Uli and Yavanna. They are married. They are key players in the story. So Yavanna is this goddess type person, I guess you would say, who is very connected with nature. She has these special trees throughout the story and throughout the history of kind of Middle Earth, and they show up in very significant parts of the book. It's essentially like she can imbue goodness and purity and things like that into these trees and like different things, basically making them like sacred and holy, and they can't be tainted by evil essentially. And then there's Yuli, who actually he kind of gets a little bit impatient, and when he's waiting for their god Uru to create humans and elves, he gets a bit impatient because he knows that they're coming, but he just can't wait and sit around. So he creates the dwarves, which is why they are, I guess, not very perfect in proportions and things like that, because they weren't part of the original plan, if that makes sense. I wouldn't necessarily say they were a mistake, because he definitely created them with an intention. It's more just they obviously weren't created by God himself, so they're not, I don't know, they're not part of the original plan for the world, which is why they kind of stay on their own a little bit. They're a bit of a grey area when it comes to morally good or morally bad, but Orly basically admits to Uru what he's done, and Uru's like, it's fine, you can keep them, just kind of keep them under control, basically. Then there is Oromi and Vanna, there is Mandos and Vea, and Lorraine and Este. There is Niana, who's also by herself. She is essentially the angel of, I guess you'd say, grief and mourning, but and like sorrow and things like that, but she's good. And I don't know, she just kind of brings balance to the whole situation, but she's definitely good. Then there is Tolkis and Nessa, which concludes the 14 good angels. And then there is Melkor, who is also called Morgoth by the people of Earth. He is essentially the Satan figure in J.R.R. Tolkien's world. He goes on to create Balrogs, which are basically his demons, and then dragons, who, fun fact, in Lord of the Rings, all dragons are evil. I didn't know this prior to reading the Silmarillion. I obviously know that Smaug and stuff are bad, but I didn't realize all dragons in this world are evil. And then, so underneath the Valar, there is the Maiar. The Maiar are basically the servants and helpers of the Valar, but they are imbued with special powers. I don't know biblically what they're meant to represent, but again, I don't know how much it really matters because it is ultimately fiction. So there are a couple of key Maiar in the story. Most of them don't really have any significance, like they're not really mentioned, but there are a couple of key players. So Melian is the kind of main Maiar that is talked about throughout the book. She actually goes on to marry an elf king, which is probably why she's so prominent in the story, because then there's like this powerful being dwelling on Middle Earth, and she ends up having a half kid with Thingol, who is the Elven King. So she's very special. She also hides an Elven kingdom from evil for quite a number of centuries. So she's a very key player. Then there is Ossie and Yunin. I'm going to, again, butcher these names. They are a married couple, and they are the masters of the sea. They are basically the kind of bridge between the elves and the Valar when it comes to, anything sea related. So when there's ships that are trying to reach the land where the Valar live or anything like that, these two guys kind of are involved in all of that, helping people either get to safety or stopping them from kind of getting to their destination if they're bad. And then the main mayor that everyone knows about is Sauron. He is obviously super evil. He is Melkor's kind of henchman person, I don't know, who ends up becoming Lord Sauron, and we know obviously Lord of the Rings and everything like that. So underneath them is then the creation of the elves. So essentially the elves and the dwarves are almost on the same standing. It's just the elves have more power than the dwarves do because they're created by Uru himself. So the elves are immortal beings that they don't really have power. They just have, I don't really know how to explain it. They're not like powerful like the Maya and the Enu are. They will die if they are like stabbed or whatever, but they won't die of old age, and they don't have any magic in them or anything like that. They are considered, though, very wise and very good warriors because a lot of the elves go and spend time with the Valar in the Valar's land. So the Valar, they actually live in their own little world, which is kind of hard to explain. It's on the same planet, I guess you would say, as Middle Earth, because if you get in a ship and you go, just keep going west from Middle Earth, you will reach their land, which is called Valinor. So at the beginning of time, when the elves are there, but man hasn't showed up yet, the Valar are so excited to have the elves that they basically invite all of the elves of Middle Earth to come live with them, and they teach them all of their ways. So although they don't have like godly power, they still have more power than, I guess, a normal plain elf would, or like a human would, for example, because they have all of this knowledge and power and strength and stuff from just being around these godly figures and learning from them. Plus, yeah, they can't just die of old age, so they have a lot of history and know a lot of things like that. Melkor actually takes some of the elves in the beginning because he is very jealous and hates this whole situation. He actually captures some of the elves, and through capturing and enslaving and corrupting these elves, he creates the orcs. So orcs are actually evil elves that have basically been corrupted so badly that they have physically changed. And they are basically then, like, he kind of leaves them in Middle Earth to multiply and destroy, essentially. And then underneath the elves eventually comes man. They were created last, as was Uru's plan. Surprisingly, very late after the elves, which I think even the Valar, well, based on the story, the Valar are even surprised because they're like, when are we getting man? Because we know that's in the story. We know that's your plan. Like, when is that happening? And then all of a sudden, thousands of years later, they show up. And basically, men are just your normal men. They are not powerful. They don't have immortality. They just live, die, all of that. Their actual ability to die of old age and not having long lifespans is actually called a gift from Uru, because they basically don't have to live with the weight of kind of what it does to you to see so much throughout your life. Like, it's almost like a relief when you die because of the things that you see, and like for being alive for too long, what that creates and all of that. So it's actually in this story considered a gift to die, which is a really interesting concept. Also, the elves have like a different afterlife to the humans. So the elves, when they die, they go to this place, and from what I gather, they basically live on in this other place. I think they can come back from that place, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Whereas, like, nobody knows except for Uru where the humans go when they die. And basically the Valar just trust that it's all part of the plan and it's this good thing. But you never find out about that. So that's really interesting. Yeah, really interesting to know. So that's kind of like the historical overview. That's kind of where all these creatures came from. It does not explain where the animals come from, or where like things like the hobbits and things come from. It doesn't explain that. They just show up. I'm assuming you're just meant to go, oh yeah, Uru put them on the earth at some point. But unlike the rest of his creations, it is not talked about. Which I do find quite interesting. I am wondering if maybe that was in some of other Tolkien's notes that just didn't make it into the Silmarillion because it didn't go in cohesively or something like that. But yeah, so that's kind of the overview. Then there is the whole Rings of Power situation and everything that's going on with that. So basically, the overview that I'm going to give you is just a brief kind of history of it. So essentially what happens is Sauron creates the One Ring to rule them all because these morally grey, I'm going to say, but mostly on the side of evil, humans create these, and elves and stuff, create these rings to basically become more powerful. And Sauron sees this and he's like, I want to get in on this action. I want to rule them all. So he creates the One Ring, which basically allows him to control and manipulate all of the wearers of these other rings. So he basically creates, so the lesser rings are called the Rings of Power, and then there's obviously the One Ring to rule them all. And the original wearers of the Rings of Power become the wraiths that you see in the Lord of the Rings. That basically every time Frodo puts on the ring, they come and like attack him. They are the original ring bearers. So that's kind of what happened to them because they wore the rings too long, essentially. And part of that whole story is the story of the Númenóreans and the downfall of Númenor. So essentially what happens is the whole reason, I guess, that the rings are created and all of that and why there's this huge fight for power is because there's a huge war and Melkor gets finally dealt with by the Valar, and he gets basically imprisoned forever in this void. And during that war, the only humans that were loyal to the Valar were the Edain. So essentially, Melkor was able to manipulate the hearts of all of the humans and turn them against the Valar, except for this one group of people. So because of that group's faithfulness, they got blessed by the Valar. So the Valar basically gave them extended life, not eternal life, just extended life, and gave them special knowledge, wisdom, gifts, that kind of thing. And power, but like not obviously to their extent, but they were considered the most powerful humans to ever live and the most long living humans to ever live, that kind of thing. So because they were so blessed. They were also given a land called Andor, which was later called Numenor, or the kingdom there was called Numenor. And this was a land between Middle Earth and Valinor. So it's not of kind of either, it's this special in between zone essentially. And so from there, they could distantly see Valinor and distantly see Middle Earth. But their one rule was you cannot come to Valinor. You're not allowed. So they were never allowed to sail west. They were only allowed to sail east back to Middle Earth if they wanted. And they were happy there. They were thriving there. They had everything they needed. They even had a sapling from one of the special trees that Yavanna made, and they essentially had, like, I guess, a temple there that they would come to and be like, thanks Valinor, thanks Valar, thanks Eru, all of that kind of thing. So they would worship there, and it was like a sacred place. And everything was going well until a few thousand years had kind of gone past, and they kind of got consumed because they were still human. They still had evil within them, so they were still tainted by Melkor. And so slowly over the years, they started to get this nudging of, well, we want to be immortal. Why can't we be immortal? We want to be immortal. That's all we want. And so they tried conversing with the Valar and being like, hey, make us immortal, please. And the Valar were like, no, we can't do that. Because the Valar can't do anything against Eru. And because Eru had made that their death like a fixed point, the Valar didn't have the ability to change that. So they were like, sorry, we can't do that. You need to just accept your gift of death. And like it slowly festered over the years until finally one of the kings died and his like son became to power, and he wasn't a very good guy, wasn't a very good king. He kept going back to Middle Earth and kind of being tainted more and more by the evil humans and the evil elves and all of Sauron and all that's minions and everything. And they basically ended up they went and fought a war on Middle Earth against Sauron. Sauron then tricked them and was like, oh, I'll be good. And they were like, fine, whatever, we'll give you a chance. So they give Sauron a chance. Sauron basically becomes the bad king, or I don't know, he's kind of just great at this point. He becomes his advisor and starts twisting his ear and all of that kind of thing, and like secretly turns the king bad over time, to the point where Numenor ends up in this huge like war, and like they totally disown the Valar, destroy everything, break the rules, all sorts of things. And the only people that like stick with the Valar are called the Faithful Ones. They kind of flee to Middle Earth and get on these ships and everything. And basically Numenor gets destroyed in this process, and all of the Numenorians that are not the Faithful Ones go to Middle Earth, and then that's kind of what kicks off the whole Rings of Power situation. So yeah, that's kind of the backstory. That's kind of what's going on in the Silmarillion. a lot of what I have said is spoilers for the Silmarillion, just because, again, most people don't get through it, and so I thought I would just kind of tell you what's going on. But yeah, there's definitely some good shorter stories in there that I definitely recommend reading. Some little love stories and adventure stories and kind of thing, but there's no like grand epic or anything like The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings itself. So maybe try reading the smaller stories within, rather than reading the whole history and everything, and just reading the bits that kind of flow better for you. But yeah, that's kind of the Silmarillion in a nutshell. And if you are looking forward to the Rings of Power TV show, I definitely recommend at least reading the Rings of Power section in the Silmarillion, just so you kind of know what's going on and who the different people are and their names, everything, and the places. Because yeah, it's a bit different, but yeah, let me know what you guys think. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!